Mashing in Street Fighter. It's a tale as old as time, and not just because of that Ken player who's been stalking you on Ranked. Since Street Fighter 2, mash moves have been core to the franchise, and they remain so, but they haven't always been the same. Like everything else in fighting games, they evolved. If you're not familiar with these moves, they are most commonly found on three members of the cast: E Honda, Chun-li and Blanka. They're specials done by simply pressing a button multiple times. In the case of Blanka and E Honda, this button is punch, and for Chun-li, it's kick. There are more characters with this type of move depending on the game, and sometimes Chun's lightning legs are a motion input, but these three are easily the most seasoned practitioners of the mash, so we'll focus on them. On the surface, these are the easiest moves for anyone to do, right? You quickly press a button enough times, then a special attack comes out. And that is the case, but as always, there's nuance to this. Let's start how we always do and roll back to Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. In this game, to get Honda's 100 hand slap out, you need to press the same punch button 4 times as quick as possible. The key thing to note here is that it has to be the same strength button you press all 4 times, meaning you can't press light punch twice, then heavy punch twice, and get the special out. With any kind of mash move, the special has to be buffered. If you go to press heavy punch 4 times, heavy punch will come out first, because you cannot do those 4 button presses immediately. Following the heavy punch though, you will get the 100 hand slap, but the button before is laggy, making it not that great in neutral. So you want to buffer the 100 hand slap behind a quicker attack. Often Honda will use crouching medium kick or stand jab for this. It's difficult but doable and core to his game plan. There's not really an easy technique for this beyond pressing the button you want to buffer from at the same time as the punch, then mashing. It works, but when you pick the character up, he feels a little bit unwieldy when trying to learn this. It's kind of bizarre and maybe just my personal preference, but there is a kinetic quality to mashing a button while trying to be precise that just doesn't sit right for me. It's not like mashing out of a throw or a dizzy. You want to be exact, and often the only way to improve at this is to simply mash quicker, which can be frustrating. It's not a deal breaker for the character or anything. Honda players have been dealing with this for 2 decades now, and a lot of them are 100% consistent with it, but the learning curve is steep, and honestly, if you're a pad player, it's a mountain. This criteria for mash moves stuck around for a pretty long time. First Strike had the exact same system of pressing 1 button but upped the number of presses to 5 times. The addition of empty moves like dash forward also gave you added flexibility for setting up lightning legs without having to whiff a button first, but ultimately it had the same issues. Before we get into the modern incarnation of these moves and how the developers were able to make them feel far more controlled, let's look at an example where Capcom purposely made a mash move bad in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 with Wolverine's Swiss cheese. This is another rapid fire move, but you never want it to come out. Its sole purpose is to deter mashing. Basically every other thing you can do with Wolverine is better than this attack. It scales your damage, it has bad startup, everything is bad about it. Obviously, it succeeded in stopping people from mashing attacks during block strings, but it also nerfed his movement, which is the far more important nerf. If you start plink dashing around the screen, it is very easy to accidentally have this attack come out, leaving you to just get punished. But the thing is, if they wanted to make his movement worse, they could have just made his movement worse. Normally when I see new ideas from developers, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt and find out what's interesting about them. Swiss cheese, I personally think, is ridiculous. Developers shouldn't be punishing players for mashing. That is the task of their opponent. It is quite literally one of the first things you learn when jumping into our genre. I will say, however, it does give him a very situational infinite, and we do like infinites in this house, so I'll give Capcom that. Now back to Street Fighter. In Street Fighter 4, everything about mash moves changed with one single modification. Every strength of button contributes to the input needed for the mash move, regardless of the output. This sounds more complex than it is. So in this game, it requires 5 inputs for 100 hand slap to come out. If I press light punch twice, then medium punch twice, whatever button I press next will activate the special and designate its strength. Meaning if I press heavy punch, heavy 100 hand slap will come out. Why does this matter? Well, simply because of the technique it allows for. Instead of just slamming a button as quick as possible, you can now piano your fingers across the buttons, and this makes it so much quicker and easier. It's efficient to the point where you can cancel Honda's light punch into heavy 100 hand slaps with ease, unlike in Street Fighter 2 where you're instead just buffering behind the button and not cancelling. You would do this by pressing light punch, heavy punch, medium punch, light punch again, and finally heavy. These techniques weren't just limited to stick players either. If you were on pads, you could slide your thumb across the buttons to easily get the inputs necessary for these specials and combos to come out, making him a far more accessible character regardless of the peripheral you played on. This change pretty much immediately took the mash out of mash moves, and suddenly the accuracy players were able to execute complex sequences using them skyrocketed. If you want to see how precise people got, look no further than players like Valmaster and combo makers like Desk. The lightning leg loops they are able to execute are beautiful and completely altered the character's game plan. Don't get me wrong, Street Fighter 4, as well as adjusting the mechanics for these moves, also gave them far more utility than in older titles. But even if they had this utility in Super Turbo, it would be close to impossible to do some of these combos consistently. With this change, these characters' special moves were all accessible to someone not up for developing RSI. Kind of. They became very easy to use if you knew the various applicable techniques, but if you didn't, you were gonna struggle. If you saw a Blanka player combo light punch into electricity as a beginner, you would probably think they just pressed light punch a whole bunch. But they didn't, and this couldn't be any further from the truth, meaning unless you researched the game, you were left behind as the game offered no explanation for these techniques, and they were so important. Street Fighter V fixed this. It kept Street Fighter 4's rule that regardless of the strength of a button, it would contribute to a mash move's input, but they changed the number of required inputs down to 4. So what this meant was, if you're a new player looking to combo Honda's light punch into heavy 100 hand slap, you can press jab, which counts towards the input, then cancel it into the special by just mashing heavy, because you only have to press it 3 times. Ultimately, the result was that you could use any of the piano or slide methods from Street Fighter 4, but also do the original, more widely understood method of just simply pressing a button quickly, but it's easy enough that you can hit all the necessary combos on demand. When we talk about accessibility in fighting games, it's often framed in a negative way, which I get. I personally like hard execution. I can't help but instinctively raise a tentative eyebrow when the subject is brought up. That being said, I do admit there is another side to this that is often ignored. The evolution of mash moves on a mechanical level led to them being far more useful in different situations due to the combo potential from quick normals. On top of that, it actually often raised the bar of execution, believe it or not. CVS2 had the same system for mash moves as Street Fighter 4. Without this, things like roll cancel electricity would have been actually impossible without a buffer. Instead, it's just hard, and the move as a consequence has a ton more utility and interest behind it. Accessibility means different things for different levels of play. Maybe for a beginner it means easier combos, but for an advanced player, these changes can manifest as something much more important, and we have to consider that when we engage in this discourse, otherwise we can accidentally stunt a game's evolution.